Earthquakes in eastern Hualien are shaking and scaring tourists away from the county. With President-elect Lai Ching-te set to take office in 2 weeks, how could China respond? China's President Xi Jinping is in France looking to deepen trade ties. Plus, we take a look at the future of technology and what Taiwan's biggest chipmaker has in the works. Hello and welcome to TaiwanPlus News. I'm Leslie Liao with the latest. Thank you for joining us. Over a month on from the massive earthquake that rocked Hualien, tourism to the area has yet to recover. The industry is a huge chunk of the economy of Taiwan's east coast, and businesses are struggling. Our reporter Reese Ayers meets some of those worst affected.
A stone's throw from destruction. This mountainside business, located north of Hualien City, is lucky to still be here after the huge magnitude 7.2 earthquake that struck Taiwan on April 3rd.
这边有一颗地震过后，然后蛮明显的一颗大石头，然后这个也是我们蛮心惊胆战的一个，因为它当初掉下来的时候卡在这边，现在很怕就是又来一个大地震，然后让它又滚落下去。 对，
然后这里有人住吗？
当初是有人住，那我们也很怕后山的落石又会再掉下去，所以就是请里面的人员移到隔壁阿姨的房子去住这样子。
Meters away, the main building of the Dajili tribal house still standing, somehow relatively unscathed.
这个地方刚好是一个平台，那我们后山就是一个岩壁。 那它其实有一些落石是它是往旁边的，那就是非常幸运，只有一些碗破掉，然后你看到一些艺术品都没有，都好好的。
But now that the worst of the quakes and aftershocks seem to have subsided, this business faces another problem.
Usually bustling with customers, this restaurant and indigenous activity centre is completely deserted. They've barely had any custom since the quake.
And that's because tourists are now too scared to visit.
我们陆续就接到好多电话，就开始一直退单，然后一直退到7、8月，订单全部都退掉。
And it could be a long while before things pick up. Businesses around Taroko National Park rely on tourists visiting the gorge for most of their income. But the park was closed after the quake and may not reopen for years.
大概到2018年的时候，看有没有机会就完成整个的重建，因为有一些的灾损，它非常的严重，像萨卡当步道，那个部分几乎已经是崩山的一个状况。
The park's closure and the fear of aftershocks is affecting businesses all along the east coast, in a county that heavily relies on tourism.
我们还在硬撑啊，看能撑多久算多久，因为毕竟你看我们现在没有收入了。 几乎只有本地客。
那客户就是害怕，因为怕说来这里住了，看到大楼倒塌了，不敢来了。那所以退单量几乎全部退到0了。
差了有10倍有，对。
But there may be hope on the horizon for businesses. Charity drives are generating huge amounts of cash. And Taiwan's central government recently approved a roughly $1 billion aid package to help rebuild the county and subsidize visitors' trips.
那确实对于花莲的这个观光产业来说是注入一剂强心针。那我们也期盼政府的这些振兴的方案能够带来旅客的一个信心的回流。
For now, businesses like Dajili Tribal House are using the downtime to expand their business models or carry out some much-needed repairs until Hualien County and visitors' faith in the area are restored. Patrick Chen, Joseph Wu and Reese Ayers in Hualien County for TaiwanPlus.
DPP convener Ke Jianming has officially apologized after he made a contentious remark saying Hualien earthquakes happened at the right time to, quote, save Taiwan's democracy. Irene Lin has the story.
causing a stir in the legislature. He Jianming, the caucus whip of the ruling Democratic Progressive Party, mentioned the deadly 7.2 quake that recently rocked Taiwan in a speech in a manner that surprised and offended many. He says he only meant to express that the quake led to a rescheduling of the legislative session to May, when the two parties will have ample time to prepare for a proper sit-down. But the opposition KMT says He made a mockery of a natural disaster. The opposition whip represents Hualien, the epicenter of the quake.
笑看灾区，啃食台湾的人血馒头，深刻地表达最大的谴责。
Hours after making the statement and receiving public backlash, He now says it was a slip of the tongue, and he was referring to meetings being postponed as a way to keep the power balance in legislative discussions.
引起大家误解以及不舒服，本人在这里郑重地表示道歉。
This comes a month after a major 7.2 earthquake struck Hualien, leaving at least 18 people dead and causing millions in damages. The coastal county is highly dependent on tourism, but strong aftershocks are keeping visitors away, worsening the blow on residents. And despite He's apology, his original statement has upset county officials.
不应该拿灾害这件事情作为来开玩笑，或者是借任何理由的一个说法。
But as He apologized, he was also quick to criticize the KMT, saying they twisted his words.
要做不当连结，引起大家不舒服，我也认得。
In response, the KMT has called on President-elect Lai Ching-te to apologize on behalf of his party and settle the problem.
要求赖清德整顿民进党，把这些腐败分子逐出国会。
No matter the motives behind He's remark, the people of Hualien have more pressing concerns as they work to recover from the quake. And the last thing they need is to be caught in the middle of a political war of words. Scott Huang and Irene Lin for TaiwanPlus.
With less than 2 weeks to go before Taiwan's new president is inaugurated, preparations for the big day are ramping up. The country's army has been rehearsing a major flyover exercise for the ceremony. Jaime Okan went to check it out.
Preparations are underway for the inauguration of President-elect Lai Ching-te later this month. And that includes demonstrations by the military as he gets ready for the big day. That includes dozens of helicopters at this army base in Hualien City as the army prepares for a tradition that sees Taiwan's largest national flag flown over the capital on May 20th on Inauguration Day.
最大的挑战点是国旗小队与协议小队都必须在同一个时间点那做一个集合的动作。那 在空中集合的过程中，因为是不同的着向，在集合的时候，可能就对于飞行机组人员会有挑战性比较高的状况发生。
In recent weeks, the military has been on alert as China, which threatens Taiwan, ramps up military activity in the region. In the lead up to the ceremony, the military will practice these flyovers multiple times, each in the very early morning around 5 a.m. Defense officials say that practices for the inauguration flyover will begin early next week and are urging the public not to panic if they hear fighter aircraft or helicopters flying over the country. Instead, they should feel confident that the military can not only protect the country's sovereignty, but also celebrate it. Joseph Wu and Jaime Okan in Taoyuan City for TaiwanPlus.
4 Chinese Coast Guard ships entered prohibited waters around the Jinmen Islands on Monday. The Taiwanese Coast Guard sent out 3 patrol boats to intercept the Chinese vessels. It's the second time Chinese vessels were patrolling waters near Jinmen in recent days. Taiwan says it will continue to monitor and expel ships that enter prohibited waters. China has maintained a constant presence around Jinmen since 2 Chinese nationals were killed in a clash with Taiwan's Coast Guard earlier this year. To learn more about China's military activity in the lead-up to President-elect Lai Ching-te's inauguration, reporter Wesley Lewis spoke to security analyst and co-founder of PLA Tracker Ben Lewis.
With just a few weeks to go before President-elect Lai's inauguration, what reaction can we expect from China?
Well, China has a number of tools at its disposal to signal its displeasure with Lai's inauguration or his speech on the 20th. The one that's probably the most concerning is the potential military response, which would be a show of force similar to what we saw probably in April 2023 a large number of Chinese military aircraft flying around Taiwan. I think what we can go based off of more recently is previous political developments involving Taiwan that drew a large military response. August 2022, when Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan, that's kind of on the most extreme end of the spectrum. And then something like in April 2023, when President Xi met with House Speaker Kevin McCarthy in Los Angeles, we had 3 days of fairly large-scale exercises that showed off China's military strength that involved carrier aircraft launched from the Western Pacific. I think that if there is a response to the inauguration, it'll fall somewhere between those two things. Specifics are impossible to predict. And there's also a chance that China may choose to not do anything at all and wait and see if they can try and work with President Lai.
What kind of military harassment will Taiwan be faced with in the 2 weeks leading up to Lai's inauguration?
What we've seen so far in the month of May is a fairly standard level of military activity. I think that in the lead up to the inauguration, I wouldn't be surprised if they are planning something larger, if there was a scaling back in order to kind of make sure everything is ready. If they're hoping to do something kind of longer reaching, we could see heightened levels of ADIS violations, large numbers of ships employed around the island. Unfortunately, it's going to be difficult to know kind of what the specifics are given what the MND is sharing, but I think the signs will definitely be there if we start seeing large numbers of aircraft flying around the island.
Do you think China is going to play a wait and see with President Lai, or will they start their pressure immediately?
As of right now, I haven't seen any signs that they're preparing to do anything, but the reality is, given the reduction in military activity heading into the election period, they are in a position where if they want to do something, I think they can make that decision and execute it fairly quickly. So I think that China is going to have to make a choice as to what kind of message it wants to send. You know, they can choose to respond to essentially what's in President Lai's speech or what's not in President Lai's speech. If they're expecting a return to the 1992 consensus, they're simply not going to get it. So if that's what they're hoping for and they're going to base a response off that hope, they're probably going to respond in a major way. And then if not, if they want to try and signal a stabilizing cross-strait situation, if they want to build off the Maiying-Zhou peace tour, I think they have an opportunity to signal that, but I'm not entirely confident that that's what Beijing is hoping to do right now.
That was Ben Lewis, a security analyst and co-founder of PLA Tracker, speaking with TaiwanPlus reporter Wesley Lewis. Chinese President Xi Jinping is speaking out against criticism of Beijing's close ties with Russia during a rare trip to Europe. That's as European leaders press him to wield his influence to halt Russia's war against Ukraine. Joyce Zeng wraps the latest.
After a day of talks in Paris, French President Emmanuel Macron toasts Chinese President Xi Jinping at a state banquet at the Élysée Palace. It's Xi's first visit to Europe in 5 years, and after a pandemic, the war in Ukraine, and a weakened global economy, the stakes are now much higher. Earlier, in a trilateral meeting joined by EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, a central concern was Beijing's apparent aid to Moscow, providing weapon parts and equipment as Russia continues to wage its war in Ukraine. Macron and von der Leyen called on Xi to use his influence to stop Russian aggression, but Xi largely deflected, saying China isn't involved.
关于乌克兰危机，中方已经多次阐明立场。中国既不是危机的制造者，也不是当事方、参与方，但我们没有隔岸观火。 而是一直在为实现和平发挥积极作用。
Von der Leyen acknowledged that Xi Jinping played an important role in de-escalating Russia's nuclear threats. She also emphasized that the future of EU-China relations depends on Beijing making good on its claim that it too wants to see peace by ensuring no Chinese tools get to Russia.
We've also discussed China's commitment not to provide any lethal equipment to Russia. More effort is needed to curtail delivery of dual-use goods to Russia that find their way to the battlefield. And given the existential nature of the threats stemming from this war for both Ukraine and Europe, this does affect the EU-China relations.
Aside from Russia's war in Ukraine, stabilizing prickly EU-China trade was also at the heart of Macron and Xi's talks. Europe and China have launched tit-for-tat probes on Chinese electric vehicles and European brandy, which hurt both countries' markets and expanded the bloc's already massive trade deficit with China. Macron thanked Xi for his openness on the issue of French cognac, suggesting at least a delay in the imposition of Chinese tariffs.
Je remercie le président aussi de son ouverture quant aux mesures provisoires sur le cognac français et souhaite de ne pas les voir appliquées pour ce qui est des mesures provisoires. Plus largement, nous souhaitons continuer l'accès au marché chinois dans les secteurs de l'agroalimentaire, de l'aéronautique, des cosmétiques, de la finance et l'agroalimentaire, en particulier, fait l'objet de plusieurs contrats importants signés aujourd'hui.
Seen as the most concrete outcome from the talks in France, Xi's backing of Macron's call for global truce at this summer's Paris Olympics. But with Russia reportedly gearing up for another offensive against Ukraine, and Xi's next stops being to Russian allies Serbia and Hungary, the test again is whether the Chinese leader's promises here in Paris will prove to be more than just words. Howard Zhang and Joyce Sun for TaiwanPlus.
Australia's Prime Minister has described a military incident between one of its helicopters and a Chinese fighter jet as unacceptable. The Chinese Air Force J-10 jet dropped flares near an Australian helicopter in international airspace over the Yellow Sea. The helicopter was in the area helping enforce UN sanctions on North Korea. Anthony Albanese says Australia has lodged complaints with China on multiple levels.
We have made very strong representations at every level to China about this incident, which we regard as unprofessional and unacceptable.
Stay tuned to TaiwanPlus News, because coming up after the break, we look back in a history on a decisive battle in Vietnam that ended French rule.
Thank you for watching TaiwanPlus News. For more stories from Taiwan and around the world, visit our website or follow our social media.
In the face of adversity, the power of truth.
A roadmap for a just and open world, charted by the freest country in Asia.
Taipei for TaiwanPlus.
TaiwanPlus News, a voice of freedom in Asia.
Welcome back. You're watching TaiwanPlus News. Taiwanese chipmaker TSMC will keep its place at the top of the industry for years to come. That's what semiconductor experts are predicting. As John Van Trieste explains, it's the chip giant's focus on speed, power, and efficiency that will drive its success.
In the race to build the world's most advanced computer chips, Taiwan's TSMC looks set to hold on to its lead. That's because in plants like this, big ideas are taking shape. The latest is this, so-called 1.6 nanometer technology. Chips made with it will start coming out in 2026. They'll have three important advantages: speeds up to 10% faster, power use up to 20% lower, and more tightly packed transistors, in some cases up to double the density of current chips. In short, the new chips are going to be more powerful, more efficient, and more compact. And that's just what a key up-and-coming industry, AI, needs. Phone makers will also be interested.
因为我们对手机的运算力要求持续增加，而且手机晶片的数量够大，可以分摊那个光照的成本。
Some industry insiders expect this demand will allow TSMC to keep its edge over rivals Samsung and Intel.
在2026年的时候，在制程技术上面来讲，不会让 Intel 专美于前，因为 Intel 在2026年也会导出他们的4世代，也就是14A 1.4奈米制程，因为在1.4奈米跟1.6奈米几乎是处在一个相同的一个世代当中。
And that's good news for Taiwan's economy, an economy where tech, and above all semiconductors, are key. Luffy Li and John Van Trieste for TaiwanPlus.
Some foreign professionals now only need to live in Taiwan for 2 years to become a naturalized citizen. The country's Nationality Act has been amended as the government seeks to attract more international talent. The new law applies to high-level professionals in fields like tech, arts and culture, sport, economics, and education. People who qualify also won't have to give up their citizenship of other countries. That's something most people who apply for Taiwanese citizenship have to do. After the amendment passed, lawmakers said they hope the change will help Taiwan be more competitive internationally. The death toll from devastating floods in Brazil has risen to 85, with more than 130 others still missing. The flooding has affected almost 2/3 of the nearly 500 cities in the southernmost state of Rio Grande do Sul, according to the State Civil Defense Authority. Around 150,000 people have been displaced. The partial collapse of a hydroelectric dam has worsened the conditions. President Lula da Silva has visited the disaster zone and asked Congress to declare a public calamity in the state. This status would authorize extra government spending. Veterans from France and Vietnam are marking the 70th anniversary of a battle that shaped history. Bryn Thomas looks at how the small village of Dien found itself at the center of world affairs.
Every year on May 7th, veterans from the Battle of Dien Bien Phu look back on a conflict that shaped the future of Vietnam, the world, and their own lives. Now, 70 years after the fighting ended, veterans from France are returning to the site.
Je pense que c'est un pays qui m'a apporté beaucoup de choses. C'est un pays qui j'ai souffert énormément.
Khi chiến đấu thì là kẻ thù, nhưng mà đến thời này thì chúng ta vẫn bắt tay với họ để coi như là ta cùng nhau đoàn kết xây dựng một đất nước và một thế giới này hòa bình hạnh phúc mà.
70 years earlier, France was fighting to maintain control of the Union of French Indochina, a colony made up of Cambodia, Laos, and a divided Vietnam, and it wasn't going well. Led by Ho Chi Minh, nationalist Viet Minh forces had been fighting for Vietnam's independence since 1946. Under growing pressure, France's military started to look for a knockout blow to end the war. With military and financial support from the United States, they decided to make their stand here in Dien Bien Phu. From the remote valley, they thought they'd be able to take out Viet Minh supply lines and force an end to the fighting.
Hồi đó thì chỉ bảo là Tây xâm lược Việt Nam thì Việt Nam phải thanh niên là phải đánh Tây.
France hoped their outpost would lure Viet Minh forces into open fighting where they could leverage their superior weaponry. But they underestimated the determination of their foe. Viet Minh forces, led by General Vo Nguyen Giap, cut over 500 kilometers of paths through the jungle and carried artillery pieces to the tops of nearby mountains on their backs.
Chúng tôi phải kéo pháo hàng tháng trời lên đến đây, rồi thì lại kéo pháo vượt qua dãy núi cao, rồi vượt sâu, vượt thẳm để vào trong lòng chảo chiếm lĩnh trận địa, rồi với chiến đấu với địch là qua 56 ngày đêm bom rơi.
What followed was weeks of fierce fighting. In the nearly 2-month siege, thousands died on both sides.
Cả quả bom mà nó rớt trúng vào khẩu đội, bay cả khẩu đội đi, không còn là một xác người nguyên là như này chứ. Rồi đừng còn phải nhặt các cái mảnh xương thịt nữa là nó còn treo trên cây với lại trên các cái bụi cỏ chứ.
But in the end, the Viet Minh sacrifice won them victory. On May 7th, through the smoke, a red flag appeared above the French base.
dans ce jour du 6 ou du 7 mai, on vivait dans cette atmosphère d'humidité et de pluie qui nous transperçait.
With thousands of its soldiers taken captive, France was forced to sue for peace and abandon its colonies. Cambodia and Laos became independent kingdoms, and Vietnam was divided into two independent countries, a communist north and a US-backed south. It would take 20 more years of civil war before the two were united in 1975, creating the modern state of Vietnam. Justin Wu and Bryn Thomas for TaiwanPlus.
Taiwan's iconic Ali Shan Ford's train has hit the tracks for the first time in the UK, making its first journey in Wales. The Ali Shan Forest Railway has loaned the train to a light railway in eastern Wales for 3 years. The rail company says the collaboration is a good opportunity for train enthusiasts in the UK to experience the iconic red locomotive for themselves.
落实推动双方实质的互惠交流，更能同时增加彼此在国际的能见度，期待能有更多的国际友人看到阿里山临铁的珍贵价值。
And we'd like to thank you for watching TaiwanPlus News. You can visit the TaiwanPlus website or follow our social media for more stories from Taiwan and around the world. Finally today, we leave you with these looks from the Met Gala in New York. This year's theme is Garden of Time. I'm Leslie Liao. Take care and see you next time.
You're watching TaiwanPlus News, the voice of freedom in Asia.